So once again, taking some headlines off the current pages of our news feeds, um, talking this week about Latino, or Latinx children's literature. So the New York Times have had this out. Today's July 20th, so 2 days ago, talking about the atrocities that are happening at the southern border. And I'm just focusing right now on the treatment of the children at the border. We can debate the politics, right? But the humanitarian issues are quite glaringly obvious. That might be redundant, but they're pretty out there right now. I listened to a little bit of, let's see, who was it? I can't remember the guy that was heading the questioning of Kevin McAleenan, Alinan. Anyway, he's the acting secretary of Homeland Security, and was being asked a number of questions the other day regarding the conditions of the camps at the border for children and the separation policy of children seeking asylum and being separated from their parents. And so it was, if you Google it, you'll see it's a pretty emotional hearing. So if you're interested, that would be something you might want to see. And the question, oh, that was it. Elijah Cummings, who was questioning this representative from the Homeland Security. He's acting chief. And what does that mean when a child is sitting in their own feces, can't take a shower? What's that about? None of us would have our children in that position. They are human beings. So I'm reading it very quietly, but it could bring tears to your eyes if you listen to some of the testimony. And again, not trying to get all into the politics of things, but wanting to just kind of reflect the importance of multicultural children's literature, of representing our society, reflecting the people in our United States and in surrounding areas, and having more empathy. Right? Some of that quote I keep saying over and over again is that if we can reflect lots of cultures in our books for children and for adults to read as well, then we develop empathy for other cultures, right? Not kind of happening down at the border right now, I'm thinking. So Hispanic literature typically refers to the literature of Puerto Rican, Mexican, Mexican American, Spanish American, Cuban, and Central or South American origin, individually or in combination. So that's a whole big umbrella of literature, right? This is from one of my favorite illustrators. Oh, I love his stuff. So then we don't use Hispanic, right? Latino, uh, until recently was an umbrella term for people of Latin American descent, that has supplanted the more imprecise term Hispanic, and also the kind of negative connotations of Hispanic, because that was an umbrella term that was put upon people by the dominant culture. So Cuban Americans, Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, and any people who trace their ethnic roots back to Central or South America are considered Latino if they live in the United States. Gets confusing, right? So this is what has been used, at least in my world, a little more in the academic world, and I've seen it in other worlds as well, is the umbrella term that I'll be using, and is now becoming more popular, is Latinx or Latinx, Latinx, I guess. And so it's more of a gender neutral choice. And here's the reason why. It says in Spanish, most nouns default to masculine or feminine, as do the adjectives that describe them. So that if you're referring to a group of people that includes a man, the word you'd use for the whole group would be masculine, even if that group is mostly made up of women. So there's a really good kind of fun video kind of explaining the reason why some of the culture is moving towards using the Latinx as the appropriate terminology. So check that out on the link in Canvas, and it's a quick one, and it's all young people and kind of it's good. So check that out because I think it really explains it a little bit better than I am, certainly. So here's the deal. The Latinx population is continuing to grow in the United States. So it's speculated that, so account for more than half the growth from 2000 to 2014. So 54% increase was Latinx population. And it's then, therefore, one of the fastest growing cultures in our school system. Big, big, big. And the projection by 2050, even a bigger share. So according to the federal government's annual statistical study, blah, 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 let's see, the population under the age, American population under age 17 will either be Latinx, Asian, or two or more races by the year 2050. So the projection is that 30% of children in the United States will be Latinx. 36%. Big chunk, right? Big, big chunk. So all the more reason we need to be sure that we're representing and authentically reflecting the Latinx culture in children's books. Big, important stuff, right? So I came across this and have not gotten a good update, graphic-wise anyway, for diversity in children's books. So this is from 2015. So let's just go down over the second to the left. Latinx, of all the books that they reviewed, percentage of books depicting characters from diverse backgrounds based on 2015 publishing statistics by the Cooperative Children's Book Center. So they're really a big organization. So they get a lot of books. This isn't just like kind of an isolated study. It's a good one. It's a big one. So they're saying all the new books that came out, 2015, 2.4 Latinx. So when we're looking at 36% Latinx population in the very near future, 2.4. I mean, animals and trucks, etc., they got more of the action at 12.5. So not as bad as the representation of American Indians, right? First Nations, but oh lordy, that's bad. And then we look again at the dominant culture all the way over to the right, and 73.3% were of that culture. So when students from diverse backgrounds read literature that highlights the experiences of their cultural group, they learn to feel pride in their identity and heritage. We all know that, right? You can just feel that. I mean, you can feel that right in your heart when you read something that reflects you. It's a good thing. So doing some of my research here, looking at children's books. Dang it all. Hold on, let me get that. Just a sec. No. Karen, I can't talk to you right now. I'm I'm recording my PowerPoint, okay? So let me call you in about 20 minutes. Okay, bye. Sorry about that. Thought I turned it off. I just don't want to go backwards here. Let me turn my phone off. Get off phone. Okay, so I was doing my research regarding the representation of children's literature, and I do it pretty regularly, at least once or twice a year. And so interesting to see what were some of the first beginnings of the Latinx representation in children's books. And so I came across this one. And of course, it's not, the illustration isn't that, but it kind of reflects that the first representation of Latinx character in a children's book, 1927, and it was a bad guy, right? It was a bad guy. So, and maybe it was a bad guy like Pancho Villa, who knows? So again, pretty like negative thing, right? Let's get representation of all sorts of things, bad guys included, but we need some good guys too. So I love this author, Maya Gonzalez, just amazing illustrator and a writer of books, and she's doing a lot of cool things right now. But this is good because when we talked about the different levels of multicultural stuff, remember we had like that tourist level, the first level, which is not so great, and that's what she's talking about here, is that she is concerned about stereotyping of Latinx culture with the overabundance of fiesta and tamale books. Growing up with tamales. The three little tamales. Too many tamales. My special tamale. The runaway tamale. Tia's tamales. Tia's tamale trouble. A night of tamales and roses. Sophia's awesome tamale day. So anyway, there's a lot of those are great books, and there's tons of other books that are now coming out reflecting this culture in a much more interesting and authentic way. So that's on the rise. But I just Googled, children's books, tamales, and I could have kept going. And not to suggest that food isn't an important part of every culture, right? So not trying to diminish that at all. But we're back to the idea of stereotypes and just grabbing one thing and hanging that on a culture, right? And so that whole single story kind of thing that we've talked about, that it's okay to have those stories, but if we don't have any other stories, then that's all we're representing of a culture. And the assumption that a single book about a group can adequately portray that group's experience. And again, I had said how teachers just grab what they can because they're overworked, and so they get on the internet and get like, I need to do a lesson plan on something, and they grab the first book of that culture, and a lot of times it's stereotypical, right? So that is a danger, the danger of the single story. So this is a comparison of two children's books, and I didn't put it well, I put a little bit of it together, but it's one that I actually got off the internet. And the first one is A Day's Work. That's a book that's very popular, and the other one, A Gift from Papa Diego. So let's dip into that for a second. So A Day's Work is done by a person not of the culture, just so you know, and it's a book about a grandfather and a grandson. So the grandfather lives in Mexico, and the grandson does not live in Mexico, and then his dad dies, and then his mom is, like kind of, they're not making ends meet and stuff. So the grandson says, let's, get their grandpa over to kind of help a little bit and bail him out. And so it's a story about that. What happens is that there's day workers, right? All in days work, and at least in Sacramento, I know that so men typically, and maybe some women, but mostly men, congregate in some areas, and people come and get them for some kind of cheap labor or hard labor, and a lot of them are Mexicans, and they're going to, do the work when they can, and they're going to work hard. So the grandfather comes over and is kind of hanging out, and they he gets a job as a gardener. Now he doesn't speak English at all, so the grandson has to do all the translating, and so he gets a job as a gardener. And what happens is that the employee says, okay, do you know anything about gardening? Yeah, I know lots about gardening. So then he does it. He comes and does it, and what happens is that he makes mistakes because he isn't a gardener, and he pulls out some of the good stuff instead of the bad stuff. So it has kind of a really, it kind of has a really crappy storyline, right? That's kind of embarrassing. And then, here's the grandfather trying to come over and help do things, and he's kind of shamed. And so it's And so the Mendoza and Reese, these two professors, kind of put together a list of what you might glean from this book. And in the illustration showed us Mexican Americans who wait for work, scramble for work, lie to get work. So I just highlighted some of them. Feel ashamed, dismayed at the mistakes they made, or at a disadvantage if they don't speak English. And then importantly, is that the kids have to mediate between adults. They have to do the translation, and that can be a big burden, right? So not being able to tell a weed from a desirable plant makes the grandfather look like a total stooge. And see, the grandfather actually is this like learned guy, well-read, educated, and all the stuff. He just doesn't know English. So then it turns him into a big buffoon, right? So I just decided to dig around because I kind of said a couple times how teachers that run out of time and need to grab something from the internet to finish out their lesson plan, there's a ton on a day's work. So this is not a scientific study, but because I didn't want to take forever doing it, I pulled out 15 different lesson plans for a day's work, and just all of them underscored the importance of honesty. That was the lesson that was being taught, to be honest. So then that's just against the grandfather right there, right? Then it wasn't about hard work and helping out or whatever. It was about being honest. And the deal is that 12 of them had at least 1 or 3 questions highlighting the boss and his compassion, his ability to forgive the grandfather. So what a message, right? What a message, first of all, that what we're supposed to glean out of this book basically is the grandfather's a big fat liar, and that the employer that hired him, even though he got mad, he was just a really great guy, and he saved it all, right? The benevolent, compassionate white guy. So here's just some examples. So this is a question there. In the story, Ben shows the character trait compassionate. So Ben's the boss. Compassionate means feeling or showing sympathy, concern, blah, blah, blah. Find 2 sentences in the text in the book that show Ben acting in a compassionate way. Oh, what a guy. So not to say that that's great. Great, Ben, that you're a kind employer. And then here was another one. Use 3 adjectives to describe Ben. Review the whole story to find at least one example from the text to support each answer. So he's caring, he was thoughtful, he's fair. So yeah, Ben could have been all those things. That's great, Ben, thanks. But the book was about the grandfather. And so all the lesson plans are really just spotlight on Ben. So here's another book. This was a gift from Papa Diego. So same kind of storyline, right? Grandfathers. And so this one, even though I don't like this clay stuff, is much lighter tone. More things are happening, a little cheerful, a little more positive stuff. Great. Yeah. So anyway, just a good story. And they all live happily ever after or something, right? But then these are some of the themes, like positive things going on. And so the deal is, it's not that a day's work is just horrifically awful. It's just that, again, we're using just single stories, right, to tell the story. And that's the problem. So Mendoza and Reese continue with their research, and they checked for availability for both of these books. And so that's what's interesting. I like this, the notion that accurate and authentic books with insider perspectives, like we talked about with American Indians, are readily available. So availability has to do with what's in the library, what's in the bookstore. So they looked. So they checked the local library system, had 4 copies of a day's work. They were all checked out. And then the local library had 1 copy of a gift from Papa Diego, which was on the shelf, never been checked out. So then we grab the books that we know about, right? So at the bookstore, checking out both of the books. Beautiful book, A Day's Work. They had more than 1 copy in stock. She didn't even have to look in the computer because she knew all about it. Same bookstore employee never heard of Papa Diego. We could get it, but never heard of it. So Amazon.com, so that's where they do a lot of ranking. And this was way back 2002 when they did this, but the sales ranking of a day's work was 3,800,000, right? Papa Diego, way behind. So again, the point is, yeah, get a day's work if you want, but let's tell other stories, and let's tell uplifting stories and not have them all somber and sad and awful, even though some are sad and awful has to be there too, but it can't be the single story. And yeah, that says it right there. That's the problem. So again, there's an increase in Latinx books, right? It's growing rapidly. There are fewer children's books about Latinx than there are books about either African Americans or American Indians. Didn't correct that one, which I kind of find it hard to believe about the American Indians. In addition to the fewer numbers of books published, the books tend to go out of print faster than books about the other cultures. Now, that's an interesting point, right? So why do they go out of print? They go out of print because they haven't been bought enough. They're not popular enough. And so then the book companies say, nah, I'm not doing it. So that out of print thing is pretty important. So if some of the good ones go out of print, like that Papa Diego one, they're not going to keep reprinting that if nobody's buying it. But a day's work's sure going to get in there. This is a really fun book. So again, that whole cooperative children's book center that I showed you those statistics earlier says that there are not enough books being published that honor and include diverse experiences. Only 58 books received by the CCBC in 2013 included significant Latinx content. These books represent less than 2% of the books received. So that's, again, that the research that's done is like 2%. 2% only 2% of the books they received are of Latinx content, or like good ones, right? Because we've talked about, like, yeah, you could throw a kid of color in a book, but if they're not doing anything, then what kind of representation is that? There again, Rafael Lopez, awesome, wonderful, beautiful stuff. I might have him in the link, just showing some of his, I think I'll put that back in if I can find it. If I don't, showing some of his artwork, just gorgeous. Look at that mermaid, so cool. So good stuff. When students from diverse backgrounds read literature that highlights the experience of their cultural group, they learn to feel pride in their identity and heritage. You had to say it again. Just like you got to have stuff that makes your heart feel big, right? And I've talked about this, right? African American children's literature has been really good about highlighting their heroes. They just right from the get-go they did that. In Latinx literature for a while, like I wasn't finding anything on there, any bios on anybody. But it's in the last year or so, a couple years, it's gotten so much better. You know, reflecting their heroes and thereby reflecting their stories of their culture. So, good stuff. Got to have them out there. Question I ask, you already know the answer, right? How do we counter sexist and racist messages? Got to do this. Got to alter it. We've got to infuse our society with authentic books and fabulous stories and illustrations that reflect the cultures in our society and reflect them, you know, realistically. Because here's why, right? Cultivates respect and empathy and acceptance of people. You know, I keep kind of bringing up this political stuff, and if we had a little more cultivating and respecting and empathy and acceptance, might be helping things out a little bit right now. And children's literature, multicultural children's literature, good multicultural children's literature can do just that. This is a really fun book. Looks illustrated by my guy, and I have a link of a little bit of it on Canvas. This is some really fun stuff out there. So an important thing about Latinx children's literature, and I talk about this more in my live class because I make them go do things, is that when a book is a bilingual book, we need to really be careful that English isn't privileged. And I didn't know about that until about 2 years ago. I'm looking at, okay, yeah, great, this is a bilingual book. There's Spanish on one side and there's English on one side. Well, if it's on the left side, that's the highlight side, because we start reading a book from the left and it's typically English on that. Check it out if you're looking at any bilingual books, or if the title is first in English on the top. So that's being privileged. So those things are changing a little bit, but that's a kind of a new thing to look at. I had a chance to go to Mexico City about 2 springs ago during my break and saw Frida Kahlo's Blue House. Oh my gosh, it's so cool, so beautiful, interesting, fabulous stories there, right, about her artwork. Check it out if you really want to be enthralled. So the chapter book, right, for older kids, some good stories out there about cultures that those chapter books really address things. They really just get down to business in terms of some of the rights and wrongs that are happening. This is just a really fun thing. So this is the video for, I think this is the video, yeah, for the final exam about representation. So it's just fun. So look at that, and then I'll throw a question in or something. So then I guess what would I want you to get out of this for a final exam question out of this lecture? Let me think for a second. I don't know, because we keep talking about the importance of representation. So I guess maybe I'm going to combine something with about the increasing Latinx population, right? So that means more children in classrooms, and they need to be represented. So we look at 36% coming in the near future of the population versus 2% of books reflecting the Latinx culture. I think I'll go somewhere with that, maybe. Okay, I apologize for that phone interruption, but check this video out. It's really, really fun. Have you seen that movie? But listen to what the people are saying. It just keeps reiterating all the points that we're making with multicultural children's literature, is the desire to find yourself in your society. Big stuff. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.